everybody. Hi. So I get to start the conversation. And that means everything I say is not repeated, but I'm sure that we'll be interweaving with each other's topics. I'd like to begin with the preparatory rites, and that is the anointing of the sick. We used to call it, back in the day, about 40 years ago, we called it the extreme unction, the last anointing or the last rites. And really, if you think of it, the last rites would be the funeral. So, but we changed it in the Second Vatican Council. They changed the name to the Sacrament of the Sick, and so it's really it's meant, as all sacraments are, as a communal celebration, and it's meant as a strengthening. So we think of part of the reason that we just had this extreme unction, the last anointing, was that we stopped believing in the power of God to heal. So if we put it at the very end, that even God will be able to intervene, then we'll be on safe ground. So it's really more of a faith statement. There's a difference between healing and curing. Curing, you get your old life back. Healing is a spiritual process that can happen even in the midst of illness, and it moves you closer to God. So I prefer to, I might anoint somebody 3 times in a typical situation. Maybe at first diagnosis, maybe of a serious illness. Then maybe at a time when, it might be a year or 2 later and things have changed and now we're kind of near the end stage. Maybe we do anointing again, depending. And then maybe if I'm around, I might, if I'm there at the hour of death, I might do it again. It just depends. So like with Ted Sweetlake, I went to the hospital one time. It was a children's, but it was happening so quickly and really such rapid decline. I would have anointed him the first time I saw him, and I wish that I had, because he was alert the first time. Nothing had happened. And then when I did finally anoint him was after he had been put on the ECMO machine, so he wasn't conscious. And then I was there near the time of death, but I didn't anoint him again because I had just anointed him 2 weeks earlier. So I prefer to anoint somebody while they can participate in that. And it really is a powerful sign of strengthening. People feel very, very comforted and strengthened by that rite. So that's just, that's my little commercial for that pre-funeral ritual. Then the funeral rites themselves, and I have several handouts. I'm not going to read what I wrote, but you can use them at home and follow up. So, but in the funeral rites, there really are 3 stations. There's the funeral home, there is the church, and the cemetery. So those are the typical, although we don't always go to all 3, but that sort of forms the ritual pattern. And in each of those places, each of those stations, we do something different. So in the funeral home, we tell stories, we remember. I often say to people, you will learn some things that you did not know, even as much as you know this person. I learned things about my dad that when was I ever going to learn these things? No one ever told me these things. So you always learn something, and that's really the time of remembering the person. Then we come to church, and the dynamic shifts. And at church, then we come to do Eucharist. So it's action in the present time. The Eucharist means to give thanks. We're really lifting up this person and giving thanks to God for this person. And then we go to the cemetery, and there we move, we say goodbye. We move away from their physical presence and move into a different time without their physical presence. So each of those stations then represent a different mode of time. So the funeral home represents the past. That's when we're remembering the person as we knew them. Then we come to the church and we enter into the present. We lift up in thanksgiving. We lift this person up in giving him back to God with thanksgiving. It's a present moment. We're actively involved. And then the 3rd station, we go to the cemetery and we move into a future without them. So we really have a movement of past, present, and future. Now, Bishop Ken Utner, years ago, recognized that we were short-circuiting that ritual flow. And the ritual process is very important. It's designed to move us into the grieving process. So he said what happens is we go to the funeral home, we remember the person. We come to church, we lift up in the present, give thanks. Then at the end of the funeral, we have a eulogy, which is about remembering, which belongs to the past. And then no one goes to the cemetery, so basically, we haven't made any progress at all. We started in the past and we ended in the past, and we short-circuited the ritual process. So Ken's solution, and we use it here, is to begin the funeral with an introduction. And so I have a whole half sheet, this little booklet that's folded in half, and I'm sorry that I haven't learned our new printing yet. And the middle is upside down, but you can figure out that. All the information is there, you just have to stand on your head to but so the ritual introduction is different than at the funeral home when people are telling stories. That's kind of off the cuff and more informal. But the ritual introduction is meant as a liturgical piece. It's meant in a sense to summarize in a way what we've remembered, but also to capture the spirit of the person. So it should not be exhaustive. It should be 600 to 850 words. So one page, about 4 minutes. Sometimes you need to get the hook, and it needs to be written out because it's a time of, it can be a time of deep pain, and without a script, they just can't stop, So it has to be written. I find that it's very helpful. It's really having the families do theological reflection. I don't tell them that, but that's what they're doing. And some of the best ones are people are coming with wonderful insights about this person and their spirit and how they've changed their life because of it. I think the best way to use them is to use pictures, images. My favorite introduction is 2 sentences. Judy Bass's husband, John. It begins this way. My mother met my father on a double-blind date. He was not her date. There's a whole story there in 2 sentences. So that's the kind of thing you want to use. I gave you 2 samples, and they're both different. One is Joe DeClerc, and there's a wonderful story at the beginning. She would go out to California to visit the grandchildren there. She didn't see them very often, so when she did see them, she would just burst into tears, and the grandchildren were perplexed. They says, "Mommy, why is Grandma crying? Those are happy tears." So then whenever she'd come, they say, "Grandma, are those happy tears?" So it was a wonderful way of remembering her, remembering her heart, So that's a nice image. Then they go on the other, it meant to be on the other side, but it didn't print back to back, so it's on a separate sheet. But it's from Walter Gassman, and it was nice. It was a litany of kind of a whole litany of things they were grateful for, all the things he taught them. There was like 7 kids in this family, so it was kind of a nice way to do it. So there's many different ways. I remember when my father died, we were in different places, so everybody had input. We did it by email, and then somebody put it together. When my sister died, we did it rather quick, so we did it. We sat down in about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and we said, okay, now what 3 stories are we going to use for the introduction piece? So it is a reflective process, and I think it's a helpful way to begin, kind of just determining the meaning of this person's life for us. The question of when to have a funeral, Judy Bass was reminding me on Sunday that when John died, she said, I don't remember this, but she said that I said, well, Wednesday would be better for me. And she said, well, Father Joe, we can't wait. By the time that he died, they were ready to move on. So sometimes people do put the funeral off, and that's not always so helpful. Sometimes you can't avoid that. But sometimes there's a bit of denial going on. People want to put the funeral off. Well, if we delay it, then it's not happening. Today, it's very different than in the past. Years ago, in the ancient world, in the hot climates, you buried at sunset because the body was not going to keep. So there's something to be said about that. To do it, now rather than later. We used to do 3 days. Now people pretty much do 1 day of visitation. It's a different mode. What I do know is that each stage of the ritual is difficult. So when you go to the funeral home to view the body for the first time, that's really hard. But when you've been there a while, it's like, well, this is okay. let's just stay here. And then the ritual says, now we're going to the church. And then that's really hard because we have to go to the church. But then we get there and say, well, this isn't so bad. Let's just stay here. And then the ritual says, now we're going to, you see, the ritual is pulling us into the dynamic of this to begin our grieving process. So it's very important to use those steps and those stages. So when we go to the funeral home, typically the day it is one day, and so that can present its own problems. Back when you used to have 2 days or even 3 days, you had more time. So now sometimes if it's just one day, we don't always have a wake service, a prayer service, a vigil service at the funeral home, just because there's not enough time to greet everybody. Although it's nice, I think it's an important process to do that remembering of a person, which happens, of course, informally, but maybe even at the end of the evening, you might just do, if we don't have a service schedule, so somebody could just lead what are we thankful for this person, to kind of begin that remembering process. Years ago, we used to process from the home down the street to the church, and then we would take the body from the church outside to the cemetery, which was on the north or south side of the church. In fact, that's in the past, in the old days, they would put vigil lights on the graves, and then during the inclement weather, those vigil lights were brought in and put on the windowsill of the church windows along the wall where the cemetery was, and that's how we got vigil lights in church. They came from the cemetery next door on the side of the churchyard. So now, of course, we don't process from the funeral home to the church. I haven't done it in years. I used to go to the funeral home, say the prayers for the closing of the casket, run back to church to get ready for the funeral, but we don't do that anymore. So now, mostly, the morning of the funeral, the body is brought here to church, and so we have maybe an hour visitation beforehand, and then we have a time for the closing of the casket. And that's because that's a difficult moment. So I always prepare for that, and then we have a little ritual prayer for the closing to begin a few minutes before we begin the liturgy, so people can kind of prepare for that and be ready. Okay. Oh, sometimes there is a ritual for a gathering in the presence of the body, and sometimes, especially if we don't have a vigil service at the funeral home, I'll instead meet the family when they first come for the family hour, for the visitation, and there's a nice little ritual prayer. I did that with Ted because we wait Ted at church, so when the body arrived, then we had a little ritual prayer together. It kind of helps, I think it helps to, because we don't know what to say at first. We're sort of just stunned, so it gives a chance to just chill out for a moment, with a little ritual, kind of something familiar. So we could do that too. Then the funeral, I'm not going to go through the funeral, but it's a typical mass and the greetings and everything. All of these handouts, not all of them, but most of them are on our webpage under We Gather for Funerals and for Liturgy. At the end of the funeral is the final commendation, and again, because we've already done the eulogy piece or the introduction piece, so we don't have a eulogy at the end. And then, so that's a ritual, a leave-taking. And these days, with a lot of cremation, that we don't go to cemetery as much as we used to. So that often is the end of the ritual. So there is a final commendation, saying goodbye at that point. The rituals there are the incensing of the body, which is an ancient practice to lifting up, giving, letting the prayer, like the incense rise, and we give them back up to God. I never like to incense cremains. It just seems something about the fire that doesn't seem quite appropriate. But you can. But the other thing that I like to do, and we do it a lot here most of the time, I like having a body at the funeral. It just feels to me, and the church has a preference for that too, because our bodies are temples of the Spirit, so there is a preference to have the body for the funeral, even if it's cremated afterward. So when there's a body, or at least a casket there, you can interface with that casket. So I learned this from Jack Tracy when he died. Jack was my mentor as a priest in Detroit. And at his funeral, the whole church came up and laid their hands on the casket. And I go, wow, what a neat thing. So we've been doing that. I've done that with a church of 900 people, and it's a very powerful ritual. So the family lays hands on the casket, and then everybody comes, and we have the room to move around. Everybody comes and lays their hands on the casket or on the shoulders of the person in front of them, so that the whole church is connected, with touching one another and touching the casket for the final prayer. And the prayer says, "Into your hands, Father, we commend this person." So I amended to say, "From our hands into your hands," which is a nice ritual action. Again, in the cemetery, these days we don't go to cemeteries much because there's a lot of cremation. My own preference, I'm sort of old-fashioned this way. I think there's something honest about burying a body in the ground. But out here it's not so bad because we can go to grave. A lot of the old cemeteries, you go to the chapel. And I think, well, why bother? We could have done that in church. So I prefer to go to grave. I think there's something honest about putting the body in the ground. In the Jewish ritual, everyone throws some dirt onto the casket. I think that's something, one of my most powerful memories, I think, is a father of an infant who died. I don't think the infant came to full term, but it died prematurely. And, his father was sobbing and digging the grave. It was very powerful, very profound, and I'm sure it was very healing for him to be that involved in burying this child. So, anyway, and sometimes I do go and do an interment of cremains later. Okay, that's my piece.
As she mentioned, my name is Tom Avery. My daytime job is I'm a social worker and spiritual care or chaplain for St. Joseph Mercy Hospice. Now, my badge, we just changed the name fully to St. Joseph Mercy, so my badge still says Mercy Hospice, but same company. At night, I have a different job, and I had to change things around this month. I'm a deacon also at that little place down in Royal Oak on 12 Mile and Woodward. Yeah, that's, yeah. Shrine of Little Flower, yeah, that's my place of, that's my home now for the last 7.5 years since I've been ordained. So I stay a little busy these days. Keeps me out of trouble. The kind of question that I've been asked to talk about is, when's the right time to call hospice? And that's a really hard question because every one of you is going to be coming at it from a different direction. Every one of you has a different personality. Every one of you feels differently about how hospice works. So how many of you have had some interaction with hospice? Okay, how many of you have a lot of interaction with hospice, like you really cared for somebody? Okay, there's a little difference there. Because if you really have been in there hands-on, you really know the picture, you know how much good it can do. And so the one handout that I like to point to has these words, "Don't be afraid of hospice." And that says a lot, because many times, I have met with well over 600 families in the last 2 years of doing this, and people will come and say, "It's just the end. That means I know that they're going to be dead soon." And that's probably true, because when they get to us in the hospital, it may be kind of the last times. But everybody's afraid of this decision. Everybody's afraid that it says, "I'm giving up on my loved one. I'm not going to care for them anymore." And yet hospice is so different from that. Hospice is another form of caring. It's a form of caring, it's a form of treatment that provides the best quality of life for whatever time they have left. And sometimes people aren't ready to make that decision. And as the quote in here says, why didn't somebody refer us to hospice earlier? We only had hospice care for 8 days. And we needed it for longer. So why would you need hospice? That's kind of my next step. What does hospice do that can help out? Well, the first thing, I'm going to take a step back, because one of the other topics I was asked to talk about is advanced directives. And advanced directives are important because I can tell you of the 600 families that I spoke to, maybe 60% had an advanced directive or a will completed, including people in their 80s and 90s. Now, if you're in that mode, if you're in that same place, don't wait anymore, go and do it. I'm actually finally getting it done myself. 2 years I've been doing this and telling people, and you know how that goes. Set it up. There's multiple ways of doing it. If you're just trying to name someone to take care of your last wishes, I've created a resource where you can go online. There's 3 different websites that you can go to, and you can pick up, you can print them off yourself. We're not allowed to print them out and hand them out in multiple copies. The state of Michigan is the first one, Caring Connections is the second one, and the last is Blue Cross Blue Shield. They all have about the same thing, and they're all legal in the state of Michigan without having to go through a whole bunch of legal stuff. So you can use these tools to set out, even if you've not set it out in your will or in any of those things, you can set out how you want to be treated when you can no longer speak for yourself. And it's clear for your spouse, it's clear for your children, it's clear for your grandchildren, so they don't have to worry. It really gives everybody in the family peace of mind. So as hard as it is to do it, as hard as it is to step up the plate and say, I've got to talk about this, I have to have this discussion, it makes everybody's life easier when it comes down to the very end. When everybody's struggling, well, what would they have really wanted? How would they want to be treated? Would they want that feeding? Would they want this? Well, I don't know, how am I going to make this decision? So, that's my advertisement for that part. So what is hospice? What does it do for us? Well, first of all, it's a philosophy. You know, a lot of times you'll get emails or notes from friends or phone calls, I've just put my loved one in hospice. Well, hospice isn't a place to go, though you can be in some place to have hospice care for you. But hospice is that philosophy of the best quality of life, the best care, the best comfort for however much time you have left. Typically, a doctor will have to say, yeah, they probably have about 6 months or less time. Does that mean you're going to die in 6 months? No. Do we have people on hospice longer than that? Yes. Do they graduate from hospice? Yeah, we had a 99-year-old who we graduated from hospice. She came back when she was 100 and needed it more. So, it's 6 months or less, but never assured. Okay? And during that time, what you get, if you're in your own home, which is the preferred place to do hospice, to have hospice come to you. So you no longer have to go into the hospital. You don't have to get loaded onto an ambulance and shuffled off to the ER and wait in the ER to get a bed and to go through that whole rigmarole. You can stay in your own home, and the treatment comes to you. You get a nurse case manager. And this is true of all hospices, not necessarily of ours. This is a global statement. I'm not advertising for us, though my card is on the table. But you get a nurse case manager, and that nurse case manager is going to see you just a couple times a week. She's going to check to see where you're at. What changes have you had? Have there been any increases in pain? Are you having any new symptoms? Is your breathing worse, depending on what kind of symptoms you have? She's going to kind of check on these are all of the things that would qualify a person for hospice. It's kind of a good reminder. You know, there's things like CHF, congestive heart failure, COPD, cancer, chronic liver disease, chronic renal disease, dementia, Alzheimer's, stroke, ALS. All of those are qualifying to get you admitted into the hospice care. You've got a nurse. You have home health aides that can come in to help you between 2 and 4 times a week. These are the people that come out, help your loved ones care for you, bathe you, do your hair. I don't know if they do nails or not, but we've had some requests for nails. We can make referrals to people that do haircuts in the home as well. So these 2 kind of make up a key part of your team. Pardon? Relief for the caregiver. Yeah, because that's a very important part. The caregiver, whoever is providing that care in the home, often struggles from caregiver burnout. And I'll take a sidetrack in a minute just to talk about that specifically too. Sorry, I donated blood today. Then there's another part of the team. As Father was talking about, there's this grief process that goes on. We grieve the loss of our loved one. And oftentimes, as we're walking this journey, as we're talking about losing our loved one, there's something called anticipatory grief. We're already thinking about what are we going to do without them? How are we going to get along? And how am I going to make it through life without this person I've been with for years and years? We have multiple avenues to work with you on that grief process. There's a social worker that can come out and talk to you, find other resources for you. She can be there to help you with struggles within the family. She can help settle family nerves. I say she because I usually work in St. Joe's Hospital. I don't get out to the community that much. I'm a hospital-based guy. So they're there to help with those family squabbles that might come up once in a while. I know everybody has wonderful children and perfect families, and so, you don't usually need that kind of help, but just in case, we're there to help you walk through that. There's always a spiritual care person assigned as well, to help pray with you, to walk the journey with you. Oftentimes they can bring communion if you're in the home and don't have a regular network of folks bringing you communion. We have music therapy as well. Sometimes people can really get improvement with their breathing through certified music therapists. Our music therapist, her name is amazingly Mary Joy. And she really brings joy to people's homes. She's put together music books for people so that they can leave a legacy of the music that they love. She's put together songs and CDs for families so that they could remember the loved one's music that they really enjoy. So she can really pull all that together, or she can sit and strum, and she can guide your breathing. She can speed it up or slow it down, depending on what stage you're at. If you're struggling with breathing, that's what a music therapist can do. We also have a wonderful group of volunteers. Our volunteers get 30 hours of training or more, and they can sit with you or your loved one for a couple, 3 hours a day, once a week. To again give you a break. You might need to get to the doctor, you might need to get to an appointment somewhere, you might need to just go grocery shopping. I know there's some volunteers that are here tonight, and I know our volunteer coordinator is here because she loves what she does. It's an amazing part of the hospice community. And lastly, though certainly not leastly, that grief process continues, doesn't it? It's usually not instantaneous because there's a lot of firsts that are going to come up over the course of a year, right? There's the first birthday without them, the first holiday, the first big celebration that we always joined in together. How are we going to make it through? Now, many people turn to their church. Many people have comfort in the bereavement services at funeral homes, or they have their family to rely on. We also have 2 professionals that are there for up to 13 months afterwards, and longer if you need, to really take you hand in hand. You can go to groups, you can see them individually. They're there to support sometimes those feelings that pop in your head that you're thinking, why am I having this? And I don't think I want to tell anybody. I'm happy that they're dead. Who do I talk to about that? They're there to help you walk through that, to help you feel that there was more meaning in that life, and to kind of take you through that journey. So that's the hospice concept. It's a support of a team. It's also a Medicare benefit, so we all have to work under the Medicare guidelines, and Medicare provides for 2 other parts of that. They provide for any durable medical equipment. So if you need a hospital bed, if you need tables, wheelchairs, walkers, oxygen, bedside commode, shower chairs, that all can come in as part of that benefit in the home. It also covers comfort medication, those medications that are going to keep a person comfortable. Now, as some 90-year-olds have told me, hospice just comes in, gives them morphine, and kills them, don't they? No. Morphine is there, and the morphine family are there for a lot of different reasons. We know that it works on pain. That's what we've heard. And many doctors in an emergency room will say, oh no, it's going to slow down their breathing. Well, if you're breathing about 40 times a minute, and if you're hyperventilating, you know how that feels. And it feels the same way for our loved ones. So when the morphine family was originally discovered by the Greeks, it was for breathing problems. The side effect was pain. Now, I'm speaking outside of my scope of practice, social work and spiritual care. So any nurses here can correct me. But the morphine family, that was a loaded finger. So the morphine family helps the breathing be more productive, so they're taking deeper breaths. And sometimes people will have anxiety at the end of life because they're struggling. We don't know why it happens all the time, it just happens. So there's medications for anxiety, pain. We have a whole family. These guys that are doctors for the hospice community absolutely know their stuff. They know how to keep a person comfortable. Now, the part that you noticed I didn't talk about, and I always want to tell people, am I out of time? I'm not looking at my time. Okay. The part that isn't in there, that's kind of the three prongs of hospice. The one part is not room and board. So I want to give you that up front. Room and board just isn't covered. It's not one of the benefits that Medicare or Blue Cross or any other supplementals cover. So, unless you are a GM retiree and was in the union, you don't have coverage for that room and board. That's why we talk about hospice in the home, because that's all covered. Everything is covered. We bring everything to you. We work to keep you at home in the place that you want it to be. Does that always work out that way? No. Can we refer you? Can we find you group homes or nursing facilities or assisted living facilities? Sure, we can do that. That's part of my job, to help families find places that are affordable and useful and helpful to them, to help them walk that journey. And that's kind of the whole 9 yards of it. It really encompasses what hospice is. When do you call hospice? First of all, you have to feel comfortable with it. I'm hoping that by sharing some of this tonight, you'll feel a little more comfortable in calling us sooner instead of at the very end. Because at the very end, we don't often have a lot of time to help get them comfortable. We don't get the chance to get things in place, to get a team in place, to bring in volunteers, to do all of the work that hospice is so good at. We get constantly cards, letters, emails from people saying, we just wish we would have called sooner. So that's the do not be afraid part. The other handout again was the the advanced directive. This Heart of Hospice was written by 2 of our nurses with a patient, and some of it's about a patient who's actually still with us. And then these other ones are music therapy, and then the frequently asked questions about hospice. So, and if you're ready to sign up tonight, I have no. Thank you.
Yeah.
Was that something you put in, Beth? Oh.
What I'd like to ask is, I think it was a few years ago, there was a booklet that was put out called The 5 Wishes. I think it was put out by the Archdiocese. Is that correct, Dr.
I
Joe?
don't think there was a hospice.
Or a hospice? I don't know. But I know we each took one. It was here at church. I mean, is this much different than filling out that 5 wishes?
I'm not sure. I've never seen it.
That's the
That's
first
from the
one.
hospice.
Yes, it was Peg Nelson from,
Yeah.
it was Cindy
Yeah.
Nelson.
Right.
The one thing we found with 5 wishes, it's a great way for people to tell others what they want. It's not a truly legal binding document, because you can name somebody in there. I don't know about that one, but you can name somebody, but there are no signatures that are required to really validate it, which is why I put together those 3 places to go to get a true advance directive where a witness signs, and then it's kind of a witness is signing, so you've got it all covered. The 5 wishes is a good way to start the process. It's a good thing to start your thinking. but it's not a true legal document where these other advanced directives are. I don't know about that.
Which is what that is exactly.
That's an advanced directive?
This is just,
No,
this is
just-
just to start the conversation,
Okay.
for you to start taking notes as you have a conversation with your spouse or your family. Make notes and keep track of what your thoughts are.
I think Five Wishes was created when the advanced directives law was started in Michigan.
Yeah.
But now it's become even a much
More
more
complicated.
specific
Yes.
document because they found it was so broad range that it could have been interpreted a bunch of different ways.
Anybody else? I've recently heard about green funerals.
Green burials.
Green burials, could you
That came
comment on
up,
that?
that came up at a talk recently. Oh, thank you, Father. Somebody just asked me at St. Andrews when we did this recently. In fact, one of the family came in and did a pre-arrangement with Beverly, and they asked about green burial. There's only one cemetery in this area that has a section of green burial, and it's All Saints. I was going to say the Lakes. All Saints Cemetery that's owned by Mount Elliott, which owns Resurrection and Guardian Angel and Mount Olivet. And they have one section out there. And we've had one green burial through our Waterford Funeral Home, Riverside Chapel. And it means that the body was embalmed, but it was embalmed with it's a certain type of embalming fluid. Tim bought a couple cases in case we have a green burial. And he did a preparation, but it's not, it can be placed into the earth, and you're actually placed right into the earth. You're not in a burial vault. You can't even have a headstone in that section. You have a rock. And this family that I know real well, in fact, she's one of the sacristans at my parish. She's funny, and her and her husband were active in the church too. Checked into it, and the cost, it was so cost prohibitive because I'm not saying I'm against it, but it was less expensive than to have an earth burial because the cost was so expensive, and not on our part, but on the part of the cemetery. The grave and the opening and closing is more expensive than it is for a traditional. You would think it wouldn't be. And in this case, the person was buried in what looked like a very large wicker basket you'd see at the Easter market. It was that type of, we actually went to Sullivan Funeral Home. They bought a couple, they had never used them. We bought one from them, and they'll just replace it. And then we had a visitation. I believe that funeral mass was at St. Perpetua's. In fact, I'm sure it was. I know it was. And then they had the green burial. But that's the only cemetery I know around that has it. It's the only family that we were requested by. And they lived in St. Clair Shores. And then when they got a hold of All Saints Cemetery, they asked the cemetery, do you have any funeral home out there you think that would take care of us? And they said, yeah, I called Tim Simpson at Simpson Modets. They'll take good care of you. Tim called me and said, well, call Sullivan's. They have the caskets. And he said, well, I bought the fluid because they want to have a visitation. And it's just a little bit different than how I prepare the dead today. And he said it was just different, the basket, but he said it was very nice. But he said that they lowered the wicker basket right into the soil and then closed the grave. One thing I didn't talk about, I'll be real brief on this, cremation. Father mentioned it. Earth burial, we probably still do more earth burial than we do cremation. We do a lot of cremation after the visitations or after a funeral mass, but so many times, that's probably the one that's the most controversial issue sometimes among children. What they don't know is if you're married, your husband and wife, and your wife dies, the husband can sign for the cremation. So whether it be before visitation or after a funeral mass, and then as Father said, you bring the body to church and the person's cremated after the mass. But when the second spouse dies, and there's 4 children, the law's changed now, we only need 3 signatures, but we won't do it without a 4th. Because in the old days, they required all. But there's every once in a while, there's a child that lives in the street, they have no idea where they live. So they require the majority signatures. 2 children, both signatures. 3 children, 2 signatures out of 3, and out of 4 children, they still require 3. So they require the majority signatures. And sometimes that's a hot topic. The family says, well, we don't care about our brother. He lives out of state, he's not any part of the family. I said, yeah, but he can come back and sue me. And I can't do that. And it's against the law. So I said, even if you don't like him, may I call him and email him a cremation form? And you know what? 99.9% of the time, the brother said, oh, my dad died? Yeah, email it to me. And it's not a problem. That's just a question about cremation.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I know in our parish, Kurt and Sue Meyer, when Kurt's mother died, they had a green burial. That's why I knew it was at All Saints.
Oh,
I couldn't think of the name. I was going to call it the Lakes.
I've heard several families, they take the ashes, instead of having them interred someplace, they said, Dad liked to golf, we're gonna spread the ashes on a couple of, whatever. In my extended family, they went out to sea, did the ashes. I personally don't like it. Is there some legal thing or ethical or moral thing to back up
I was
my
going to
thought?
mention, the Catholic tradition is that we honor the body, and so we honor the cremains in the same way. And so the cremains would be interred, just as you wouldn't throw a body out into a field. I'm making light of that, but it's not our tradition. I use that language. I don't want to put a guilt trip on people that maybe have done that. And there are fights in families about just that.
Yeah.
But I think it's important for people to know that it is, you could call it our law, but people, it doesn't matter, right? But so that they don't later find out that, oh, we had a position about that. We had a position about everything, but that's
I believe there are laws about it.
There are laws?
Yeah, most federal parks, it's illegal to do so. So if you want to go to a big federal park and spread them out on the sand dunes, they can haul you in. I think it's a pretty big fine, too.
Yes.
Okay.
They don't really, in most places when families do scatter cremated remains, as Father said, it's really church doctrine that they're to be treated with the same reverence of the body. And that doesn't mean earth burial or a niche. I even believe that doesn't mean on your shelf at home. It really does mean a place of reverence, a cemetery or a mausoleum crypt. There's even a Catholic church that has one. I think St. Hugo's has a cremation niche.
They do.
Columbarium, yes. So it's, but some families do that. I agree with you on that. I'm not comfortable with that. But I know families, I say, well, if you're going to do something like that, it's probably better not to ask. If you're going to do it, do it. But I wouldn't encourage it, and I didn't tell you to do it. But if you ask permission, you got a better chance of being told no. We did ask recently at a golf course. They knew the family well, and the man died. And after his funeral, he was cremated, and they wanted to scatter the ashes. And the owner of the golf cart, he says, come by and get a golf cart and do it yourself. And I said, so I sent my son Scott out there because the family didn't want to do it, and they asked us just to take a picture to prove that we were doing it.
Oh,
But
no!
I'm not really
Oh, my
comfortable
God.
doing that. So.
Okay, any other questions?
I think we do have, I think, but I'm not certain of this, I think we have burial at sea as part of our tradition.
Right.
Yeah.
You got a question?
Yes, I think you said in your talk that you held some cremains for the families. Did you do that?
And we have in our Rochester funeral home, and I don't, to be honest, I don't know about Silverville. I know they have a receiving, what we call a receiving vault. I know they have a receiving vault, but I asked how many cremated remains, and sometimes we have them. I had a family a few years ago. A man came in, and he bought a house. And he came into my funeral home, and he says, when I bought this house, it was a, what do you call those when they lose the house? A foreclosure. And they found this box, and then they realized the sticker on the box was some of these ashes from the 50s. Cremation wasn't very big in like 58. What do we do? So I said, well, let me take them from you. Do you know the people? No, I bought it from the bank. No. So talked to the bank. We didn't have any access, so I called Michigan Funeral Directors Association in Lansing, and they told me, well, you're not responsible to hold them, but the proper thing is, I said, I know what the proper thing is. Mount Hope Catholic Cemetery in Pontiac on Orchard Lake Road. There's a man, Joe, that ran it for years, and I always kept track of the name, and I said, would you mind just burying these here and tell me where they're buried, and we'll mark it down, and we'll always have access, and I've never heard from the people. But here's a man that people took ashes home and left them, and that's why I think the diocese was right. They really belong in a place of reverence, because to me it was like a discarded person, and it just wasn't right. So.
Any other questions?
I've heard of palliative care. What's the difference between that and hospice?
Palliative care and hospice. We talk about palliative care if a person has just received a terminal diagnosis. So, for example, I also work at the hospital in the cancer center, and they're starting to work with heart patients as well. So you have a diagnosis that you're probably going to die from, whether it's first stage, early stage cancer, or early heart CHF, and you could use a little more support. With palliative care, you're still typically able to get into a doctor's office. They're there to help provide also, for example, social work, spiritual care. I do that. That's my other badge for the hospital. That's what I see over there. But you're still typically able to get up, get around, and go do things. You don't need the extra services of hospice. There's also a lot of programs that are bridge programs now, where you start in that palliative care program, you can be in it for 2, 3, 4 years, and then bridge right into a hospice benefit, because you'll have kind of the same people, you'll have the same kind of team. So there's more and more of those coming up. So hospice is kind of the end part of palliative care, but palliative care is about providing comfort and the same kinds of medications that can help relieve the symptoms of anemia and pain and suffering. So palliative care typically first, and then hospice is just really the last 6 months of palliative care.
Anybody else?
Can I just want to, that's a good point. With palliative care, you're still able to receive all treatments. You're still working to get better, you're working to improve. Your regular Medicare is kicking in, and you're taking all your medications. You're really still going forward as if you're going to improve and feel better and get up and get around. Where hospice care means you're looking at those end stages. You may take away some medications because they're no longer helpful. Do you need a cholesterol medication if you're going to die in 6 months? Do you need those vitamins? Probably not. So palliative care, you still continue all your current treatment, all of your current processes. Sorry.
I had a question about funeral rites for Father Daly. It seems like more recently, I've been going to a lot of family. It's like a memorial mass. You know what I mean? You know, when I think of a funeral, I think of something within a few days of death, and there's a body, and there's a burial, and for maybe logistical reasons, or just people are on overload, it's sort of like, well, let's just procrastinate, let's push it back, and we're going to do a memorial service, 2 months after death. And I was just kind of curious about your thoughts on that in terms of the grieving process for the people involved, and the different rituals of the Roman Catholic tradition in terms of funeral ritual.
Right, there is more of that today, but I think it's mostly like with the elderly. So in a sense, as John mentioned, you already have sort of this preparatory grief. You've been caring for them for a while, and now you really want to celebrate. I mean, it's a full life, and so I would hardly ever have that with a very painful death or somebody, a sudden death. That would be a denial kind of thing. But mostly, people are going to wait. Maybe in the summertime, the family can all come, and that's when we'll celebrate this person's life, and that seems legitimate. And interestingly, it's just as sad when we finally do it. People do tend to. There's more of these designer sort of things. It's not the 3-day anymore, and everybody wants Saturday now, and they back up. I can only do 1, maybe 2 on a Saturday. Last year, 2 years ago, we had to. First time in my whole life, I had to have 2 Sunday funerals because the Saturdays were booked, and then we just had to do them on Sunday. Yeah. So people want, when people are off work, we actually, if we don't go to cemetery, if we're not having a burial, we can do, the reason we have morning funerals, because the cemetery is closed at 2 or 3. But if we're not going to cemetery, we could have an afternoon, late afternoon, or evening funeral, and we've had that. And that would be preferable in the sense for people able to come from work, so.
But Father Joe, you've also, just from working here for so long, you encourage people to do it sooner than later many times, just for those reasons. I mean, just instead of prolonging it.
Right, it's an important part of the grieving process, and putting it off isn't usually helpful. So, and sometimes you have to. When my dad died, we all were with him when he died, and then my nephew had exams, and so it was done, and we were there. So he went home, came back home. He died on a Saturday. We came back home and came back, and we buried him the following Thursday. But it just made sense, and we're a small family, so. Yeah.
Any other questions, Jan?
I was wondering about the price range of a funeral today, and what about the price range of a prepaid funeral? That your husband is going to have
Well, no, I mean, a funeral cost really.
And what does it include, I guess?
Well, let's say, for example, I'll tell you right off our prices. If a family was having half a death and they say we're going to have 1 day of visitation, the funeral the following day, in our case, really, it doesn't really change if it's 2 days. As Father said, occasionally we do that. I'm always shocked sometimes when Mary says we have visitation Thursday, Friday, and the funeral Saturday. 2 days? And that used to be the norm when I started funeral service when I was 15 and I'm 60. But there's a charge. All funeral homes have a charge for their services, their staff, and their motor equipment. Motor equipment is sometime we move the deceased to the funeral home. There's a car that does all the paperwork for the documentation, the death certificates. And that car is usually that same car is used for the flowers the next day at the church or at the funeral home. And then the funeral coach if we're going to the cemetery or the crematory. So all that is $4,400, $4,395. So $4,400. In terms of what a family selects in the way of a casket, they might select a casket that's as low as about $400, and they might select one that's as high as $2,500. If you don't have burial, you have cremation that follows. We have like a rental type cremation casket. It's really, they're still only used ones. They're the same price as what funeral homes charge as a rental. We call them a one-time rental, but they're really simply made caskets. They look nice. They actually look very similar to caskets that popes are buried in. Very simple and made, except they're not maybe as ornate on top, but they're made for cremation. For burial, you also have the cost of using purchasing the grave. So many times, a family already has the graves. That's the one purchased item that a lot of times when they walk in the door, Mom and Dad have graves at Whitechapel. They bought them in 1972. There was a salesman that came to the house, or Holy Sepulchre or whatever. But they'll have graves. But then you still have the cost of opening and closing, the digging of that grave. And then most cemeteries require that the casket go into a cement vault. And people think, well, the vault, what's the purpose of the vault? It does two things. In some cases, it does keep water away from the casket body if that's what a family wants. But really what it does for the cemetery is it supports the grave. Because if you didn't have a vault, just like on a grave burial, the body would go back to the earth a lot quicker. And as they run heavy equipment over the graves would collapse. And so you don't have that with a cement vault really supports the grave. So most cemeteries, you go to Holy Sepulchre in most sections, you go to Arlington National Cemetery, you wonder why it's so flat and straight marker? It's because of burial vaults. But so the average cost of a funeral, I realistically would say with cost of digging and everything, usually it's somewhere between $7,000 and $8,000. I had a funeral today, it was $10,000, and I think I have a funeral tomorrow, which is about $6,200. So it really varies, but you control the majority of the cost by deciding if you buy a casket and you purchase a burial vault. And then the other cost is if you don't have graves, quite honestly, some cemeteries are more expensive than others. Some cemeteries are cemeteries that are in business for profit, and some of them are part of religious organizations. Mount Eliot, which is not a Catholic cemetery organization, but you think about it when you think about Mount Olivet, Resurrection or Guardian Angel, they're a Christian cemetery. But they're owned by an association, and they're pretty reasonable in price compared to like Whitechapel and some of those because they're in business for a profit. So if I I mean, we can answer your question by having somebody actually write down and tell you what it's gonna be, but to give you a range, I would say, $6,500 to about $8,000 is usually the cost for an average traditional funeral. It certainly can be higher than that, but it certainly can be a lot lower than that.
If you were gonna prepay,
Well, if
how do you work that out?
a family prepays, they meet with we have to, Beverly's licensed to do that, and you have to be licensed. I put mine in escrow because I don't do that. I don't do that part of our service for our company. We have experts that do everything, and she's the expert in pre-planning. So many times I'm looking at these contracts 10 years later, or 5 years later. A lady that did this before Beverly worked for us died of ovarian cancer. Kathy was with me and married for about 20 years. And to this day, I'm still taking desks and I'm pulling over the file cabinets and pulling out files. Oh, Kathy took care of them in 1994. And I think about her finally. And then it goes into the fiduciary money. It's not like some of the things you've read in the paper over the years, funeral homes or cemeteries that's run off with people's money. I don't think I would enjoy prison. So, in fact, I'm pretty darn sure I wouldn't. So, I miss my grandkids. So what happens is you come in, we put all the money, we're recognized, the law in Michigan tells us, we have a pretty strict state about what happens with money. We had a family come in the other day, his aunt or sister is dying, the one we talked about tonight, and they prepaid for a funeral, and they had to buy a grave, so the cost of the funeral was right at $10,000. Well, they did everything with Beverly, and they wrote a check and walked out the door, and I said, Bev, I saw that sitting in the desk, we talked about dinner tonight. She said, well, they think it's going to happen in the next couple weeks. I said, well, I'd rather just escrow it tomorrow, because after 29 days, it has to be escrowed. Now, we've had many people, we talked about that one person in hospice that graduated from hospice. We had a man that was dying. They said he's going to die. They brought me his dentures, brought me his clothes. About 4 days later, they came back and asked for the dentures. True story. He lived for 5 years at Boulevard Hills Nursing Home on South Boulevard. And sadly, we used to always talk because Joanne that worked for me knew this man real well. His last name was Mitten. I used to call him Mr. Glove. And I said, how's Mr. Mitten? She said, oh, sometimes I wear a glove. I stopped to see him at the nursing home and visit him. And it was really sad. I told Joanne, God works in strange ways, and he's a great author. But her son died the same day as Mr. Mitten. And she said to me, God waited so Mr. Mitten could take my son with him. I thought it was cool. But so you don't know. So in his case, it was all escrowed. And we go to his file. And then what happens? People say, well, what happens if because there's interest on the money, what happens if the cost of the funeral doesn't go as high as the interest? We refund you the money. But what happens if the funeral goes over the interest? Funeral costs more than what's in the bank account. That's my problem. I just have to absorb that. And many times we're $300, $400 short on a funeral. And every once in a while, if they did it in the early 90s and you had the good years of the boom years where the economy was good, we've had many cases that we've refunded up to $2,600. So people don't buy it as an investment to make money. They just buy it for peace of mind and knowing that it's done for the kids, and they kind of get their wishes. So.
Okay, just one more question. Another.
Sounds getting us here, isn't it? Well, we are immigrants here, and my question is, do we need to buy a grave for our family here? We are not from here. We are citizens now, but.
Well, if you want to purchase your grave ahead of time, so many times families choose. It's just like I always thought I wanted to be a Van Hoosen. So we bought 4 graves, and Mary's mom and dad, great people, went before us. And now I've had second thoughts. I said I want to be a guardian angel in a mausoleum. I know if I die first, I really believe Mary will honor that wish. But that's a peace of mind thing. If you feel better, you should purchase that. And in cemeteries, just like a prepaid funeral contract, some people pay over time. And a lot of times you can buy a grave like at Mount Elliott, like at Guardian Angel or some cemetery. Some of the city ones here are very inexpensive compared to some of the bigger, what I'm going to call a little bit more commercial cemeteries. and you just go into the township, whoever runs them. Sometimes people will call a funeral, this happens weekly. Can you tell me who owns Mount Avon Cemetery? City of Rochester. How do we buy a grave? I give him the phone number, you're gonna be talking to the Parks and Rec man. He'll meet you out there. Not much of recreation. No, but it used to be Bruce Austin, but the man from the city goes out and meets, and they say, what's available? And he said, this section, and you know, do you live within the city of Rochester, Rochester Hills? You can't live in Oakland Township. Because some cemeteries, if they're owned by the municipalities, you have to live in that municipality. In Van Hoosen, for example, you can live outside, but you pay like $300 or $400 more because your tax base pays for that. So they give the tax payers a discount. I don't know about Square Lake, Father. I think they're reasonable price.
About $150.
Yeah, to buy a grave. Whereas if you went out to Guardian Angel, it's about $1,200 for a grave. But one thing nice about that kind of land purchase, you only buy it once.
It's true.
Thank you. One more quick question, then we'll.
Hi, I'm Jim Goebel. I bought two grave sites at Holy Sepulchre, $1,225 each, $2,450 for both of them, thinking we would be buried there. And one of my old students runs a step funeral home. I thought they would do that. But then 2.5 years ago, we moved up here, and we like it here. We live off Orion Road. Our backyard backs up to the East Lawn Cemetery. So I can take one step off. I bought one there. So then I went back to Holy Sepulchre. I want them to buy them back. They won't buy them back, and they won't help me sell them. So if anybody is still looking for two, I'm standing over here afterwards. I got two of Holy Sepulchre.
I get 1,300. So I have to tell you the story of my uncle Jim, who died in 2000. My uncle Jim planned his funeral. He was dying of prostate cancer, and he had a casket made by a cabinet maker in the town where he lived. And his favorite quote of his was from Ecclesiastes 9:11. The race is not to the strong, or the battle to the swift. And he would always was fondly quoted that his whole life. So on the top of the casket, inlaid on the lid of the casket, was ECCL 9:11. Ecclesiastes 9:11, which looked an awful lot like call 911.
With that, we'll end on that note. Thank you so much for coming. Both gentlemen have their cards over there, information for contacting you. I'm going to hold Father Jones, so I'm sure we have any further questions.